The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Fort Eldridge Weapons Depot, casting harsh shadows over rows of neatly stacked ammunition. Jordan Pike moved with the practiced calm of a woman used to precision, not just of bullets, but of survival. Her hands glided over magazines, counting, inspecting, as if this simple task could restore some semblance of order to a world that had fallen apart. Before continuing this story, please comment below with your city or country where you're watching from. Your feedback inspires us to do better. Nearby, Private Earl Hendricks was fumbling with his gear, clearly overwhelmed by the oppressive July heat and the crushing pressure to prove himself worthy of the uniform. Sweat beaded on his young face as he struggled with a jammed magazine spring, his hands shaking with nervous energy. Jordan glanced over and felt something stir in her chest. An old instinct she'd thought was buried. Without a word, she moved to his side, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Easy with those rounds, Earl," she said, resting a steady hand on his shoulder. "The magazines aren't going anywhere, and neither are you. Breathe first, then work. You don't have to bleed today." The young soldier looked up at her with grateful eyes, nodding as she deftly showed him how to release the spring tension properly. Her movements were fluid, economical, the kind that spoke of muscle memory earned through repetition under fire. "There you go," she continued, her tone warmer now. "Remember, this equipment might save your life someday. Treat it with respect, not fear." "You're a natural, Pike," came a cheerful voice from behind. Sergeant Dave Martinez approached with his characteristic grin, clipboard tucked under one arm. At 52, Martinez had the easy confidence of a man who'd found his niche and made peace with it. "Bet my last dollar you could teach these rookies a thing or two about more than just inventory management." Jordan smiled thinly, years of carefully constructed barriers flickering behind her dark eyes. "If only expertise mattered as much as paperwork around here, Dave." Martinez chuckled, missing the weight behind her words. "Hell, Pike, you handle those weapons like you were born with them. Makes a man wonder what you did before contractor work." "Nothing worth mentioning," Jordan replied, returning to her counting with deliberate focus. "Just counting magazines and trying to stay invisible." But invisibility, as Jordan had learned the hard way, was a luxury that could be revoked without warning. The sound of boots striking concrete echoed through the depot with the distinctive cadence of command authority. Jordan's trained ears picked up the approaching footsteps, measured, confident, belonging to someone accustomed to having their orders followed without question. Colonel Marcus Develin emerged from between the towering shelves of military supplies like a predator who'd caught an interesting scent. At 48, Develin carried himself with the weathered dignity of someone who'd earned his rank through battlefield leadership rather than political maneuvering. His salt and pepper hair was regulation perfect, and his gray eyes missed nothing. "Excuse me," Develin said, his voice carrying the polite authority of someone who expected immediate cooperation. "I need to review your inventory documentation." Jordan looked up slowly, meeting his gaze with the practiced neutrality she'd perfected over 8 months of civilian contractor work. She extended her clipboard without comment, noting how Devlin's attention initially focused on her neat handwriting and precise notations. But then something changed. Devlin's casual scan reached the top of the page where standard protocol required contractor identification. What he found there caused his breathing to shift almost imperceptibly, a change Jordan's combat-honed instincts detected immediately. The colonel's grip on the clipboard tightened as he read and reread the faded stamp barely visible in the upper corner. 3 words that should have been classified beyond recognition. Blue Phantom, 347. The number represented confirmed kills. The name belonged to a ghost. Devlin's military experience had taught him to recognize the significance of operational call signs, particularly those whispered in intelligence circles across multiple theaters. Blue Phantom wasn't just any designation. It belonged to a legend that senior officers spoke about in hushed tones, usually followed by the phrase, "Too bad she didn't make it out." "Miss Pike?" Devlin said carefully, his voice pitched low to avoid drawing attention from nearby workers. "Care to explain why a call sign like Blue Phantom appears on a civilian contractor's inventory sheet?" Jordan's pulse quickened, but her expression remained steady. The question she'd been dreading for months had finally arrived. delivered by someone with the authority to unravel everything she'd rebuilt. Old habits die hard, Colonel, she replied evenly. Some quirks are harder to shake than others. Devlin studied her face with new eyes, looking past the contractor uniform and regulation hairstyle to see the person underneath. What he found there made him realize he wasn't dealing with an ordinary supply clerk. Jordan Pike stood like someone who'd learned to be invisible while remaining ready to move. Her posture was too perfect, her awareness too sharp, her stillness too complete. She had the bearing of someone trained to disappear into crowds while maintaining lethal readiness. Blue Phantom, Devlin said slowly, tasting the words. 347 confirmed eliminates across 7 operational theaters. Presumed killed in action during Operation Nightfall, 3 years ago. Presumed, Jordan repeated, allowing a ghost of irony to color her voice. Funny how that word covers so many inconvenient truths. The colonel's hands were steady as he held the clipboard, but his mind was racing through classified briefings and after-action reports. If Jordan Pike was indeed Blue Phantom, then one of the military's most skilled and dangerous assets was currently employed counting ammunition magazines as if her previous existence had been erased. Miss Pike? Devlin continued, his voice carrying professional curiosity mixed with growing respect. I think we need to have a conversation about your previous experience with precision work. And I think, Jordan replied, extending her hand to reclaim the clipboard, that some conversations are above both our pay grades. But as she spoke, something flickered in her eyes. Not defiance, but recognition. The game of mutual discovery had begun, and both players understood the stakes involved. Devlin lingered for a moment, studying the woman who'd once been one of America's most valuable covert assets. Perhaps you'd be interested in discussing some specialized inventory work that requires your particular skill set. Jordan resumed her counting, but Devlin could see her mind processing his words, evaluating implications and potential threats. I'm quite satisfied with my current responsibilities, Colonel. I'm sure you are, Devlin agreed, but sometimes satisfaction isn't enough. Sometimes the mission requires us to step outside our comfort zones. After the colonel walked away, Jordan continued her work with mechanical precision, but her awareness had shifted into the hyper-vigilant state that had once kept her alive in hostile territory. The careful anonymity she'd constructed over 8 months was now compromised by someone with connections that could reach all the way to the top of the military hierarchy. Dave Martinez approached her station near lunch, his usual cheerfulness tempered by curiosity. Everything okay, Pike? That colonel seemed mighty interested in your inventory sheets. Just routine verification, Jordan replied smoothly. Officers love their paperwork. But routine was no longer an option. Jordan's discovery by Colonel Devlin had set events in motion that would force her to confront the question she'd been avoiding since her official death. Could the skills that had made Blue Phantom legendary find new purpose in a world that no longer required her to kill? That evening, Jordan sat in her sparse apartment, staring at a secure phone that hadn't rung in 3 years. The space reflected her minimalist approach to civilian life. Functional furniture arranged for clear sightlines, no personal photographs that might reveal classified connections, nothing that couldn't be abandoned at a moment's notice. The knock on her door came at precisely 1900 hours. Military precision, even in civilian settings. Jordan opened the door to find Colonel Devlin standing in the hallway, his expression serious but not hostile. He wore civilian clothes that did nothing to diminish his command presence. Colonel, Jordan said, stepping aside to let him enter. I figured you'd want that conversation sooner rather than later. Thank you for agreeing to meet privately, Devlin replied, settling into the chair she indicated while noting her tactical positioning near multiple exit routes. I've spent considerable time today reviewing classified files and making some very interesting discoveries. Jordan remained standing, her posture relaxed but ready. And what did those discoveries tell you? That Jordan Pike officially died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan 18 months after Blue Phantom was declared killed in action, Devlin said. 2 different deaths, 2 different identities, same person. Bureaucracy loves its paperwork, Jordan observed dryly. Sometimes it's easier to kill people on paper than deal with inconvenient realities. Develin leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. The inconvenient reality is that Operation Nightfall was a setup. Intelligence suggests the mission parameters were deliberately compromised, resulting in the deaths of 6 operators and the presumed elimination of Blue Phantom. Jordan's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. 7 operators went in. Only 1 came out. The math isn't complicated. But the survivor's story never made it into the official reports, Develin continued. Blue Phantom's final transmission mentioned enemy forces with detailed knowledge of American tactical procedures, suggesting inside intelligence. Inside intelligence, Jordan repeated, her voice hardening. Such a clinical term for betrayal. The colonel studied her reaction carefully. The question is whether you're interested in finding out who sold out your team. Jordan moved to the window, looking out at the quiet base housing complex where other contractors and military families lived their ordinary lives. The people who did this to me, to us, they're not going to conveniently confess because I ask nicely. No, Develin agreed, but they might make mistakes if they believe Blue Phantom is truly dead and buried. Are you suggesting I become bait? I'm suggesting you become a teacher. Jordan turned to face him, intrigued despite herself. Explain. Develin reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder marked with classification stamps. Fort Eldridge has been tasked with establishing an advanced marksmanship program for special operations personnel. We need an instructor with real-world experience who can prepare our people for the kind of scenarios where half-second hesitations mean body bags. And you think a dead woman makes the perfect instructor? I think Jordan Pike, civilian contractor, with mysterious but impressive credentials, makes the perfect cover for someone who needs to operate in plain sight while hunting the people who betrayed her team. The offer was elegantly constructed, a chance to return to meaningful work while maintaining her civilian status and creating opportunities to investigate the corruption that had destroyed her previous life. What makes you think I want revenge? Jordan asked. Develin's expression softened slightly. Because I've read the after-action reports from operators who served with Blue Phantom. They describe someone who never left people behind, who took responsibility for everyone under her command. The kind of person who wouldn't rest easy knowing the people responsible for killing her teammates were still out there. Jordan felt something stir in her chest, an emotion she'd tried to bury along with her former identity. The position would require security clearances, background investigations. Already handled, Develin replied. Jordan Pike's credentials are solid, and her specialized knowledge of advanced marksmanship techniques makes her uniquely qualified for the position. And if someone recognizes certain skills that go beyond civilian training, then they'll assume you picked up impressive abilities during undisclosed private military contracting work. Happens all the time with operators transitioning to civilian careers. Jordan considered the proposal while studying Develin's face for hidden agendas. The colonel appeared genuine, but she'd learned the hard way that appearances could be weaponized against those who trusted too easily. I need guarantees, she said finally. No active operations, no classified briefings that could compromise my civilian status, no pressure to return to the field. Agreed. You'd be teaching, not operating. Though I suspect the distinction might become blurrier than either of us expects. Why are you doing this? Jordan asked. Why risk your career helping a dead woman find justice? Develin's expression grew distant. Because 3 years ago, I lost some good people in an operation that felt wrong from the beginning. The official investigation found operational errors and communication failures, but no one was held accountable. Sometimes the system fails the people it's supposed to protect. Jordan nodded slowly. She understood the weight of carrying responsibility for deaths that could have been prevented, the gnawing certainty that justice had been buried under bureaucratic convenience. When would you need an answer? Take your time, Develin said, rising to leave. But don't take too long. The people we're hunting aren't going to wait for us to be ready. After the colonel left, Jordan sat in her empty apartment and allowed herself to remember, not the sanitized version she'd constructed for psychological survival, but the raw truth of that night in Afghanistan when everything had gone wrong. The mission had been straightforward. Eliminate a high-value target who was coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence placed Hassan Kazemi at a remote compound, and Blue Phantom's team was tasked with surgical elimination and intelligence recovery. But from the moment they'd inserted, nothing had felt right. The compound's security was too sophisticated, the enemy response too coordinated, the tactical situation too perfectly designed to trap American Special Operations Forces. When the shooting started, Jordan had been in an overwatch position nearly 2 kilometers from the target building. Through her scope, she'd watched her teammates fight desperately against overwhelming odds, calling for extraction that never came, requesting air support that was mysteriously unavailable. One by one, they'd fallen. Marcus Torres, her spotter and closest friend in the unit. Sarah Kim, the communications specialist who'd kept them connected to the outside world. James Rodriguez, the team medic who'd saved all their lives on previous missions. David Chen, the explosives expert who could turn everyday materials into precision tools of war. Captain Lisa Morrison, the team leader who'd made the impossible decision to stay and fight rather than abandon wounded teammates. And finally, Staff Sergeant Michael Brooks, who'd died trying to create a distraction that would allow Jordan to escape with the intelligence they'd gathered about enemy tactics and American operational vulnerabilities. Jordan had survived by using every skill accumulated through years of training and combat experience. She'd evaded capture for 6 days while injured, eventually reaching an extraction point where she was recovered by friendly forces who'd assumed the entire team was lost. But instead of receiving medical treatment and recognition for her survival against impossible odds, Jordan had been detained and questioned as if her teammates' deaths were somehow her fault. Evidence had been manufactured suggesting operational failures, security clearances had been revoked, and her official existence had been erased through bureaucratic sleight of hand. The woman known as Blue Phantom had been declared killed in action, and Jordan Pike had emerged from a medical facility months later with new identity documents and instructions to disappear into civilian contractor work. But disappearing had never been an option, not when the people responsible for her teammates' deaths were still out there, still making decisions that could get more operators killed, still profiting from the betrayals that had cost 7 of America's best their lives. Jordan reached for her phone and dialed the number on Colonel Develin's business card. "Colonel," she said when he answered. "When do I start?" The Advanced Marksmanship Facility at Fort Eldridge was a state-of-the-art complex that featured both indoor and outdoor ranges, ballistics laboratories, and classrooms equipped with the latest simulation technology. Jordan's first day as an instructor began at 0500 hours, with a tour of equipment that rivaled anything she'd used during her operational career. "Impressive setup," she told Colonel Develin as they walked through the main instruction hall. "Someone spent serious money on this program." "Someone with connections to the people we're interested in," Develin replied quietly. "The funding came through channels that bypass normal procurement procedures." Jordan nodded, understanding the implication. Following the money might lead them to the network responsible for Operation Nightfall's betrayal. Her first class consisted of 12 special operations personnel from various service branches, each selected for advanced training based on demonstrated marksmanship abilities and operational experience. Jordan studied their faces as they assembled, noting the mixture of confidence and skepticism that characterized elite units meeting new instructors. "Good morning," Jordan began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "My name is Jordan Pike. I'm here to teach you things that aren't covered in standard marksmanship manuals." Master Sergeant Tony Reeves, a veteran of multiple deployments with Special Forces, raised his hand. "What kind of things, ma'am?" "The kind that keep you alive when standard procedures aren't sufficient," Jordan replied. "How many of you have taken shots beyond 800 meters in combat conditions?" Half the hands went up, which was actually more than Jordan had expected. "How many beyond 1,200 meters?" 3 hands remained raised. "How many beyond 1,500 meters?" Only 1 hand stayed up, belonging to a lean Navy SEAL named Chief Petty Officer Amanda Walsh. Jordan made a mental note to watch Walsh carefully. Operators with that kind of experience often had insights that could enhance the curriculum. "The record for the longest confirmed kill in combat is 3,540 meters, Jordan continued. achieved under ideal conditions by an operator with custom equipment and perfect environmental factors. But effective sniping isn't about record distances. It's about making the shots that matter, when they matter, under whatever conditions exist at the moment of truth. She moved to a display showing various rifle systems and optics packages. Today, we'll start with fundamental principles that apply regardless of distance or equipment. Breathing control, trigger discipline, environmental assessment, and most importantly, target identification and engagement decision-making. The morning progressed through basic exercises designed to evaluate each student's abilities and identify areas requiring improvement. Jordan watched their techniques with the critical eye of someone who understood that small errors in training could become fatal mistakes in combat. But she also noticed something else: the way certain students reacted to specific scenarios, the questions they asked about enemy tactics, the casual references to operations that weren't supposed to exist in official records. During the lunch break, Chief Walsh approached Jordan with the direct manner that characterized senior enlisted personnel. "Miss Pike," Walsh said, "your teaching methods suggest experience that goes beyond civilian training. Mind if I ask about your background?" Jordan had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that was technically accurate while avoiding classified details. Private military contracting work in various locations. The kind where accurate shooting is a survival skill rather than a sport. Walsh nodded, accepting the explanation while clearly recognizing there was more to the story. Any particular regions or operational focus? Wherever American interests needed protection, Jordan replied. The work doesn't always make it into official reports. The conversation established mutual understanding without explicit confirmation. Walsh recognized Jordan as someone with legitimate combat experience, while Jordan identified Walsh as the kind of professional who could be trusted with sensitive information when appropriate. The afternoon session focused on environmental factors affecting long-range shooting. Jordan led the class through calculations for wind drift, temperature variations, altitude effects, and atmospheric pressure changes that could affect bullet trajectory over extended distances. The difference between a hit and a miss at extreme range often comes down to factors most shooters never consider, Jordan explained. Humidity affects air density. Barometric pressure changes throughout the day. Even the rotation of the Earth becomes relevant at distances beyond 1,000 meters. Sergeant First Class Kevin Martinez, a Special Forces operator with multiple deployments, raised his hand. How do you account for all these variables in combat conditions when you don't have time for extensive calculations? Experience, Jordan replied simply. You learn to read environmental signs instinctively, to make rapid assessments based on visual and tactile cues. But that kind of intuition only comes from extensive practice under varied conditions. She moved to a whiteboard and began sketching diagrams that illustrated complex ballistic principles in simplified visual form. The goal isn't to memorize formulas. The goal is to develop an instinctive understanding of how environmental factors interact with ballistic realities. As the class progressed, Jordan found herself drawing on memories and experiences she'd tried to keep buried. Teaching required her to access the knowledge accumulated during her operational career while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to function as a civilian instructor. But the work felt right in ways she hadn't anticipated. Watching students master difficult concepts and improve their capabilities provided satisfaction that reminded her why she'd originally chosen military service. The day concluded with individual assessments where each student demonstrated their current skill level through practical shooting exercises. Jordan observed their techniques while making notes about areas requiring additional instruction. Chief Walsh's performance was particularly impressive, confirming Jordan's initial assessment of her experience and abilities. But several other students showed potential that could be developed with proper guidance and intensive training. As the students departed, Colonel Develin approached for a debriefing about the program's first day. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than expected," Jordan replied. "These aren't typical military marksmen. They've all seen real combat and understand the stakes involved. That makes them easier to teach but harder to impress." Any concerns about security or recognition? Jordan considered the question carefully. Chief Walsh knows I have more background than I'm sharing, but she's professional enough to respect operational security. The others are focused on improving their skills rather than investigating their instructor's credentials. That's what we hoped for, Develin said. Professional respect without excessive curiosity. As Jordan gathered her materials and prepared to leave the facility, she reflected on how different this felt from her previous military experience. Teaching allowed her to contribute to operational effectiveness while remaining safely removed from the personal dangers and psychological pressures of active missions. But she also recognized that stepping back into the military world, even in a civilian capacity, was awakening aspects of her personality and experience that she'd worked hard to suppress. The challenge would be maintaining the balance between being effective as an instructor and protecting her psychological well-being. 3 weeks into the program, Jordan received an unexpected visit that would test every assumption she'd made about her new role and civilian status. She was working late in her office, reviewing individual student assessments and developing specialized curricula for operators with different skill levels, when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," Jordan called, expecting to see Colonel Develin or perhaps one of her students with questions about the next day's training. Instead, a woman in her mid-30s entered, wearing civilian clothes but moving with the unmistakable bearing of military intelligence personnel. Her appearance was carefully unremarkable. Average height, brown hair, forgettable features that would blend into any crowd. "Miss Pike," the woman said, closing the door behind her. "My name is Agent Sarah Chen. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency." Jordan felt her pulse accelerate, but kept her expression neutral. "Agent Chen, what can I do for you?" "I'm here to discuss your current position and certain historical connections that have come to our attention." Chen took a seat across from Jordan's desk without being invited, a subtle power play that established her authority in the conversation. "Your marksmanship program has been generating positive reports from students and their command structures. Impressive work for someone with your officially limited background." "Thank you," Jordan replied carefully. "I take pride in effective instruction." "I'm sure you do." Chen opened a slim portfolio and extracted several photographs that she placed on the desk where Jordan could see them. "I'm particularly interested in your insights about these individuals." The photographs showed faces Jordan recognized, operators who'd served with Blue Phantom in various capacities, personnel who'd been involved in Operation Nightfall's planning and execution, and several individuals she didn't immediately identify, but who clearly held positions of authority within the military intelligence community. "I'm not sure how I can help you," Jordan said. "These appear to be classified personnel files." "They are," Chen confirmed. "But I think you have more insight into these people than your civilian contractor status might suggest." Jordan studied the agent's face, looking for clues about her true agenda. "What kind of insight are you looking for?" "The kind that comes from operational experience with individuals who might not be entirely trustworthy," Chen replied. "We have reason to believe that some of these people have been involved in activities that compromise national security." The conversation was approaching dangerous territory. Jordan needed to gather more information without revealing knowledge that could compromise her civilian status or expose her true identity. "Agent Chen," Jordan said carefully, "I'm a marksmanship instructor. My expertise is in teaching people to shoot accurately, not in evaluating their loyalty or trustworthiness." "But you were a contractor in various conflict zones," Chen pressed. "You would have encountered some of these individuals in operational contexts." Jordan nodded slowly. "Private military contracting creates opportunities to work with different military personnel. But those relationships are typically professional rather than personal." Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more intense. "Miss Pike, we have evidence suggesting that Operation Nightfall was compromised by someone with inside access to American tactical procedures and operational planning. We believe the person responsible is still active within the military community." The revelation hit Jordan like a physical blow. Agent Chen was investigating the same betrayal that had destroyed Jordan's team and forced her into civilian exile. "That's a serious allegation," Jordan said, working to keep her voice steady. "Do you have suspects?" "Several," Chen replied. "But we need someone with operational experience who can evaluate their behavior and identify potential indicators of deception or compromised loyalty." Jordan realized she was being recruited for an investigation into her own official death. The irony was almost overwhelming. The Defense Intelligence Agency wanted Blue Phantom's killer to help them find Blue Phantom's killer. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Jordan said. "Continue your normal duties as a marksmanship instructor," Chen replied. "But pay attention to interactions with personnel who might have connections to classified operations. Report anything that seems inconsistent or suspicious. You want me to spy on military personnel. I want you to help us identify traitors who have American blood on their hands." The emotional appeal was carefully calculated, but Jordan recognized that accepting Chen's proposal would create complications that could threaten both her civilian status and her investigation into the Nightfall betrayal. "I need time to consider this," Jordan said. Chen nodded, gathering the photographs and returning them to her portfolio. "Of course. But don't take too long. The people we're hunting aren't going to wait for us to be ready." The phrase was identical to Colonel Devlin's parting words weeks earlier. Either it was a remarkable coincidence, or there were connections between these investigations that Jordan didn't yet understand. After Chen left, Jordan sat in her empty office and tried to process the implications of what she'd learned. The Defense Intelligence Agency was actively investigating Operation Nightfall, which meant the betrayal hadn't been successfully buried under bureaucratic convenience. But it also meant that multiple agencies were pursuing the same leads, creating potential conflicts and complications that could expose Jordan's true identity if she wasn't extremely careful. She decided to contact Colonel Develin and arrange a private meeting to discuss Agent Chen's visit and its implications for her continued role as a marksmanship instructor. The meeting took place at a secure location off base, in a small restaurant that Develin had selected for its isolation and defensible approaches. Jordan arrived first, choosing a table with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. When Develin joined her 20 minutes later, his expression was more serious than she'd seen since their first conversation. "Agent Chen paid you a visit," he said, without preamble. "You know about that?" "I know about a lot of things that aren't supposed to be connected," Develin replied, "including the fact that the Defense Intelligence Agency has been investigating Operation Nightfall for the past 18 months. Jordan studied his face carefully. "Are you part of that investigation?" "In a way," Develin admitted, "but not in the way Agent Chen probably suggested." He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "Jordan, the people who compromise Nightfall aren't just random traders selling intelligence for money. They're part of a network that extends throughout the military and intelligence communities." "How extensive?" "Extensive enough to have sources inside the DIA investigation." "Which means Agent Chen's visit to you wasn't coincidental." Jordan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. "Are you saying they know who I am?" "I'm saying they know someone survived Nightfall, and they've been trying to identify that person for 3 years. Your emergence as a marksmanship instructor with unexplained skills has probably attracted attention from people who prefer to keep certain secrets buried." The implications were staggering. Jordan's carefully constructed civilian anonymity wasn't protecting her from the people who'd tried to kill her. It was drawing their attention. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "We accelerate our timeline," Develin replied. "Instead of slowly investigating the network from a position of safety, we force them to make moves that expose their connections and methods. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you the chance to finish what your team started 3 years ago. Ego." Jordan considered the proposal while weighing the risks and potential benefits. Operating as bait would expose her to immediate danger, but it would also create opportunities to identify and eliminate the people responsible for her teammates' deaths. "What kind of support would I have?" "Everything I can provide without compromising operational security," Develin replied. "But ultimately, you'd be operating the same way Blue Phantom always did, with superior skills and careful planning as your primary protection." Jordan nodded slowly. The prospect of returning to active operations, even in a limited capacity, was both terrifying and exhilarating. "There's something else you should know," Develin continued. "The marksmanship program wasn't just created to provide you with cover. It's also designed to identify and train personnel who can be trusted with sensitive operations that require exceptional discretion. You're building a unit. I'm building a capability, Devlin corrected, one that can operate outside normal command structures when institutional compromise requires unconventional solutions. Jordan understood the implications. Devlin was creating a black operations unit that could investigate and eliminate internal threats without being detected or stopped by the same networks that had betrayed Operation Nightfall. And you want me to help select and train the personnel for this capability? I want you to help build something that ensures what happened to your team never happens again. The appeal was perfectly calculated to exploit Jordan's sense of responsibility and her desire for justice. But it was also offering her something she'd thought was lost forever, the chance to serve a purpose larger than her own survival. If I agree to this, Jordan said, I want guarantees about the rules of engagement and target selection. I won't be part of anything that compromises innocent people or violates constitutional principles. Agreed, Devlin replied immediately. This isn't about revenge or vigilante justice. It's about protecting American operators from internal threats that the conventional system can't or won't address. Jordan extended her hand across the table. Then let's get started. The handshake sealed an agreement that would transform Jordan's role from instructor to active participant in a shadow war that had been ongoing since the moment Operation Nightfall was betrayed. But as they left the restaurant and returned to their separate vehicles, Jordan wondered if she was making the same mistake that had gotten her teammates killed, trusting people whose true loyalties might not align with her own. Time would tell whether Colonel Devlin was offering her justice or leading her into another carefully constructed trap. The transformation began immediately. Jordan's marksmanship program expanded to include advanced tactical scenarios that went beyond standard military training into the realm of specialized operations. Students found themselves learning techniques for urban warfare, hostage rescue, counter-surveillance, and what Jordan euphemistically called precision problem-solving. Chief Walsh was the first to recognize the shift in curriculum focus. Miss Pike, she said, after a particularly intense session involving multiple moving targets and complex environmental factors, this training is more advanced than anything I've encountered in regular special operations programs. The world is becoming more complex, Jordan replied. Our training needs to evolve accordingly. But Walsh wasn't satisfied with the general explanation. This feels like preparation for black operations rather than conventional military missions. Jordan studied the chief's expression, recognizing the intelligence and experience that made her a valuable asset and potential security risk. Chief, what do you know about institutional compromise? The question caught Walsh off guard. Ma'am? What happens when the people supposed to protect American interests become the people who threaten them? Walsh considered the question carefully. I suppose you'd need people who could operate outside compromised systems. Exactly, Jordan said. And those people would need training that goes beyond what compromised systems provide. The conversation established mutual understanding without explicit confirmation. Walsh understood that she was being evaluated for something beyond standard military service, while Jordan identified her as someone who could potentially be trusted with sensitive operations. Over the following weeks, similar conversations took place with other students who demonstrated both exceptional abilities and uncompromising integrity. Jordan was building an informal network of operators who could be called upon if circumstances required actions that official channels couldn't support. But she was also becoming increasingly aware that her activities were being monitored by people with their own agendas. The surveillance wasn't subtle. It was meant to be detected, designed to create psychological pressure and force Jordan into making mistakes that would expose her true identity or operational capabilities. Jordan recognized the tactics from her own training in counterintelligence operations. The people watching her were professionals who understood how to use psychological pressure as a weapon. But they had underestimated their target. Jordan had survived 3 years of isolation and identity suppression by maintaining absolute discipline over her emotional responses and behavioral patterns. A few surveillance teams weren't going to break conditioning that had been forged under much more difficult circumstances. Instead of being intimidated, Jordan began using the surveillance as an opportunity to gather intelligence about the people watching her. She mapped their patterns, identified their personnel, and slowly developed a picture of the network that was tracking her activities. What she discovered was both enlightening and alarming. The surveillance team included personnel from multiple agencies and military units, suggesting coordination at levels that transcended normal jurisdictional boundaries. Colonel Devlin confirmed her suspicions during their next secure meeting. The network we're hunting has resources and connections throughout the military and intelligence communities, he said. They know you're a threat to their operations, but they're not sure exactly what kind of threat. So they're trying to force me into revealing my capabilities, or into making a mistake that gives them justification to eliminate the threat, permanently. Jordan nodded, understanding the deadly game she'd been drawn into. What's our next move? We give them what they're looking for, Devlin replied, but not in the way they expect. The plan was elegantly simple and extremely dangerous. Jordan would demonstrate capabilities that confirmed she was more than a civilian contractor, but in circumstances that would force the surveillance network to expose their own operational methods and personnel. The demonstration would take place during a training exercise involving her most advanced students. Jordan would solve a tactical problem that required skills beyond anything a civilian instructor should possess, creating a situation where the watchers would be compelled to act. But the trap would work both ways. While the network was exposing itself to neutralize Jordan, she would be gathering intelligence that could identify the people responsible for Operation Nightfall's betrayal. Are you ready for this? Devlin asked. Jordan thought about her teammates who had died believing they were serving their country's interests, betrayed by people who had sworn the same oath of loyalty. I've been ready for 3 years, she replied. The training exercise was scheduled for the following week at a remote facility that offered both the isolation necessary for advanced tactical scenarios and the strategic positioning that would force the surveillance network to expose themselves if they wanted to observe Jordan's performance. As she prepared for what might be her final act as Jordan Pike, civilian contractor, Jordan reflected on the journey that had brought her from Blue Phantom to marksmanship instructor to active participant in a shadow war against internal enemies. The woman counting magazines in the Fort Eldridge Depot had been content with anonymity and survival. But the woman preparing to step back into the darkness understood that some battles could only be fought by people willing to sacrifice their peaceful lives for the protection of others. Jordan Pike was about to discover whether the skills that had made Blue Phantom legendary were still sharp enough to cut through 3 years of lies, betrayal, and institutional corruption. The ghost in plain sight was ready to haunt the people who thought they'd buried her forever. In the end, the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who tried to kill you in foreign countries. They were the ones who smiled at you in briefing rooms while planning your destruction, who signed your orders while selling your secrets, who attended your funeral while counting the money they'd earned from your death. Jordan had survived their first attempt to destroy her. Now it was time to ensure they wouldn't get a second chance. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, Blue Phantom would be the one choosing the targets.